Hello everybody. Welcome to this webinar on PCI DSS Compliance Checklist. My name is Kishor Vaswani and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer of ControlCase. I really appreciate the time you're taking today to attend this webinar on PCI DSS and PCI DSS Compliance Checklist. A few housekeeping items before we get started. A copy of these slides and the related checklists will be distributed to everybody. Also, a recording from this webinar will be sent to everybody early next week. As we go through the webinar, if you have any questions, please type them in the questions window. And if you have any audio or visual difficulties in hearing me or looking at the webinar, please type them in the chat window and our moderators will be monitoring it on an ongoing basis. Please feel free to go to our website, www.controlcase.com, for signing up for future webinars, as well as for being able to see earlier webinars that may be posted there. Our session today is expected to run anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes, and we should have ample time for questions and answers after the 20 or 30 minutes. So please feel free to keep on asking questions as we go along, and also feel free to let us know if you're having any difficulties seeing the webinar. That being said, let's get into our agenda. We're going to give a very high level of ControlCase. We're going to focus most of our presentation on PCI DSS basics, things like what is PCI DSS, where does it apply to, the 6 principles and 12 requirements, liabilities, and so forth. So I realize that for many of you who are familiar with PCI DSS, hopefully this is a refresher. For those of you who are new to PCI DSS or want to know certain aspects that you didn't know about before, hopefully this webinar will help close that gap. And as I said, as we go along, just feel free to put questions in the questions window as we go along. A little bit about ControlCase as we start. ControlCase focuses on IT certification and related continuous compliance services. We are a global company with more than 1,000 customers and over 275 security and compliance experts to help achieve the vision of IT certification and continuous compliance for our customers and the ecosystem. We really make sure we follow a partnership approach, and we are not a checklist auditor, and we use automation to streamline the certification process throughout our journey of IT certifications and compliance. And here are some of our certification services that we at ControlCase offer. Certainly, our focus today is going to be on the subject matter of PCI DSS. So let's start with what is PCI DSS, and let's talk about its purpose. So in 2006, the leading payment brands, Visa, MasterCard, and all the other brands got together and formed the PCI data security standard, which is maintained by the PCI Security Standards Council. And this was really built to provide all the operational, technical, and process competence required to protect cardholder data within the enterprise. So this standard focuses on protection of cardholder data in the enterprise. Now, a lot of times, you might hear some other synonyms as well, such as PCI DSS, P2PE, PIN, 3DS. Since the first inception back in 2006, the PCI Council has really developed a whole menu and a set of standards that interact with each other, that interact with the right types of technologies and processes in the payment ecosystems of merchants, service providers, banks. And what you're looking at the screen now is really the family of standards that it has evolved to, over the last decade, beyond just the PCI DSS standard. When we talk about protection of cardholder data, what are we really talking about here? We are really focused on ensuring that we're talking about credit card and debit card data. And it includes things like primary account number, cardholder name, track data, the CVV numbers, PIN blocks, and so forth that you all are very familiar with when it comes to, sensitive data. So that's a very high level on what PCI DSS is. To reiterate, it is a standard that is focused on ensuring that payment card data is adequately protected throughout the ecosystem. Now, who does it apply to? It applies to entities, stakeholders, systems that store, process, or transmit cardholder data. So anyone, if you recollect, we talked about, why is there PCI DSS? It's to protect cardholder data. And any company which has systems or an ecosystem that store, process, or transmit cardholder data PCI DSS is applicable. So if you look over here, the card brands certainly are the key stakeholder in here, but so are the acquiring banks, so are the merchants, so are the service providers, and so are companies like ControlCase, who are qualified security assessors, who provide the expertise to be able to assess companies and guide companies to maintain PCI compliance, and if you're doing it for the first time, to attain PCI compliance. So we are certified by the PCI Council to provide PCI DSS certification services, and hence we are called a qualified security assessor. As you can see, the other stakeholders in the system are, numerous. The card brands, acquiring banks, merchants, service providers, and so forth. So we talked about, what's the need for PCI DSS. We talked about the stakeholders at a high level. As we go along, just let me know by typing in the questions window any questions that come up, and I will try to weave that into our presentation, or we will have ample time towards the end to answer them. Next, let's dive a little deeper and talk about the 6 high-level principles of PCI DSS. So the first principle of PCI DSS is to build and maintain a secure network. We are all familiar with technology. We all know that networks are key to any ecosystem. And so building and maintaining a secure network is paramount. Number 2, protecting cardholder data. If you recollect, just some time back, I said the PCI DSS standard was built to protect cardholder data. And so protecting cardholder data, in whichever form it may lie, obviously forms the key principle of PCI DSS. In today's world, we are all aware that systems change, the technology environment changes, so new vulnerabilities are introduced all the time in the ecosystem. And hence, having a vulnerability management program that continuously looks at the weaknesses, fixes them on a business as usual basis is an important aspect. Number 4, access control. I know we all run into access control in our daily lives, whether it's IT related or physical building related. Strong access control continues to be a key principle of PCI DSS to protect cardholder data. Number 5, the 5th principle is making sure we regularly monitor and test networks. So we can try the best we can to secure things, but guess what? There needs to be someone also who is monitoring that things are actually working. And so that's the fifth principle. And then finally, the sixth principle is there are a lot of moving parts, and hence making sure there are policies and procedures that are updated as well as monitored against, and maintaining an information security policy that covers the right areas is an important aspect of PCI DSS. Okay, so I talked about the 6 high-level principles which can be looked at overarching principles for PCI DSS to protect cardholder data in the ecosystem, whether someone stores, processes, or transmits cardholder data. Next, let's dive still one level deeper and talk about what are the 12 more detailed PCI DSS requirements. So when we talk about the detailed PCI DSS requirements, as you can see on the left, we talked about the 6 principles, and now we're going to talk about the detailed requirements, which are 12 in number, and you can see the mapping between the principles that we just talked about and the requirements we're going to be talking about. So requirement number 1, firewalls and DMZ. So whether you're in the cloud or whether you have a data center, whether you have an office, firewalls and network access control devices have become an important aspect of ensuring appropriate segregation between the internet, internal network, and what we call the demilitarized zone, where things like web servers reside. And so making sure you're doing and managing the firewalls in an appropriate manner is requirement number 1. This would include secure architecture. This would include DMZ. This would include firewall rule set reviews. Requirement number 2 is around configuration standards. So configuration standards really apply to any operating system and device and application out there. Ensuring that baselines are appropriately set, ensuring that you're monitoring against the baseline, and ensuring that there are standard images used standard secure images used when new architecture is deployed and systems are deployed to maintain configuration standards and configuration to the latest standards is an important aspect of PCI DSS, and that's requirement number 2. Requirement number 3 is around encryption of cardholder data. So it is not necessary to store cardholder data, but it is also permissible to store cardholder data if you have a business need. And if you are storing cardholder data, you know, the things we talked about earlier, the card number and so forth, then requirement number 3 talks about encrypting in storage the cardholder data. Number 4, we talked in number 3, requirement number 3 about encryption in storage. In requirement number 4, it's encryption of the same cardholder data, but in transmission. So anytime cardholder data is transmitted, whether it's over a VPN, whether it's over a secure channel, whether it's on a portal, ensuring that it's encrypted using a strong standard of encryption is an important aspect of PCI DSS and is covered in requirement number 4. Requirement number 5 is antivirus. Probably, you know, as ControlCase and as all of you are probably pretty aware, this is probably the most easily met standard, making sure antiviruses are deployed, making sure they're configured properly, and make sure that they are catching all the common viruses and malware is an important aspect. And making sure these are installed and updated periodically is an important aspect of requirement number 5. Clearly, antivirus does not catch everything, which is why we have the in-depth 12 requirements, but one of them, and an important part of it, is antivirus. Requirement number 6 is secure applications, and you have to ensure that all applications are developed securely and are tested for application vulnerabilities. For those of you familiar with OWASP, OWASP is an industry standard that's used very often to define vulnerabilities that might exist at the application layer. And so you must ensure all applications are developed securely and without any vulnerability. Requirement number 7 and 8 is around logical access control. It not only talks about things like password strength and making sure you give access to the right people, it also talks about when people leave your organization and if people are accessing assets in your organization from a remote perspective, which in today's world is a high percentage, as we all know. Appropriate access control measures are in place and that we ensure that logical access control is appropriately addressed when systems and applications are rolled out. Requirement number 9 is, again, access control, but from a physical perspective. So things like CCTVs, badge access, review of access logs, visitor procedures, things like that are covered in requirement number 9. Obviously, if you're a company that is using the cloud, you don't have any physical assets, then the cloud service providers are responsible for ensuring physical access, and you as a customer of a cloud will inherit those physical access controls as part of your certification or your compliance program and will not need to be obviously physically secure yourself because all your assets are in that cloud environment. Requirement number 10 is around logging and monitoring. Those of you familiar with SIEM technology, that's a commonly used technology today for logging and monitoring and in ensuring that the right logs are captured, make sure they are appropriately synced from a timing perspective, making sure intrusion detection and so forth are happening properly, and making sure that there's a scalable process to respond to incidents as they come in is an important aspect of PCI DSS and is covered in requirement number 10. Requirement number 11 is around vulnerability management. A lot of you might be familiar with this. So 2 things that have to be done very frequently: internal and external vulnerability scanning and wireless access point reviews need to be done on a quarterly basis. And then penetration testing, which includes internal, external, application, segmentation, and so forth, need to be done on a frequent basis as well, typically annually, but it could also be semi-annually. So requirement number 11 talks about vulnerability management, which includes scanning as well as penetration testing. And finally, requirement number 12, which maps obviously to the principles of policies and procedures, ensure that A, policies and procedures are documented, B, people are trained on it, C, people accept to do it, D, any of the vendors you're using or third parties you're using, make sure they adhere to that. And then finally, you have a method to monitor compliance against those policies and procedures, and in case of some non-compliance, ability to respond from an incident management perspective. So far, we covered what is PCI DSS, where does it apply to, its origins, and we spend a lot of time going through the 6 principles and the 12 requirements of PCI DSS. As we get towards the end of this webinar, again, just a reminder to put any questions in the questions window. We will answer the first few questions, and the remainder of the questions, we will be answering them by email after the webinar. So certainly your question will get answered. Please feel free to put it in the questions window. Next section is what are the liabilities of not complying with PCI DSS. So these are very high level areas of liabilities of not complying with PCI DSS. We have just put 5 to 100,000 as a range. It could be lesser than that, could be 0, could be much more than that. But we wanted to just give you 80-20 rule. And so, penalties of not compliance, certainly there is financial penalties. There's lack of revenue or loss of revenue. there's damage to company reputation. There's a loss of a company's contracts because they have gone through a security breach and their customers will lesser rely on them. So there's a lot of liabilities for not complying with either information security principles in general and PCI DSS and failing to protect cardholder data in particular. And so again, PCI DSS was made and built to protect cardholder data, and certainly, there are lots of liabilities ranging from monetary to reputation for not complying with PCI DSS. How to achieve compliance in a cost-effective manner? So there are multiple methods we at ControlCase have seen where complying with PCI DSS in a cost-effective manner plays a part in. The first one is automation. Automation in collection of evidence. Automation in data discovery. Automation in scanning, testing, penetration testing. These areas help in ensuring that things are more cost-effective and actually more accurate because they are automated. Number two, maybe many of you already do one of these other regulations. There are various other regulations out there. SOC 2, ISO, the NIST cybersecurity framework. There are various regulations out there. And one audit, which means at least one audit is the ControlCase terminology for it, which is assess once and comply to many. If you're already doing something, it most likely maps back to other regulations, and being able to comprehensively do compliance regulations and not look at PCI DSS just in isolation is something that would help you and be more cost effective to your program. And then continuous. Continuous is an important yardstick for ensuring you have a cost effective manner, because things that are continuous are generally augmented by process, people, and technology. And over the long term, the total cost becomes lower when things are streamlined. And so having continuous compliance is an important aspect versus once in a year compliance. Finally, as we end this webinar, just feel free to put questions again. Why ControlCase? We are a QSA. We focus on certification. We focus on continuous compliance services. We certainly are focused on all the three aspects. We make sure things are automated. We do it on a continuous basis. And then we do one audit to assess once, comply to many. And then after that, certainly we ensure we are your partners in IT certification and your partners as a QSA, not a checklist auditor. That was all I had for today's webinar. I really appreciate you attending this webinar. Now we will move to Q&A. We will take a few questions, and then all the questions that you enter will be responded to you by email should they not be in the first two questions that we have to go over. When we publish these slides, you will see three links that we publish. There is a PCI DSS compliance checklist. There is a blog that can give you a lot of information. And then there is a definition of the 6 principles that I talked about earlier of PCI DSS compliance, also in a blog. So that is, at a high level, that is, those are the 3 pieces of information we'll be distributing with the slides. The first question I have is, what effect does PCI compliance have in today's COVID pandemic, where PCI controls have to deal with pandemic type situations, especially in physical security? Thank you for that question. That's a great question. The first aspect of that is the PCI Council has allowed qualified security assessors like ourselves, assuming we can meet all the control testing, to temporarily conduct remote assessments in situations where certainly on-site physical assessments were required during the COVID pandemic. So the first aspect is that these assessments can be done remotely. The second aspect of of what we're talking about is use of technology. So we are using, and everyone should use, technologies such as we have our automated compliance engine, automated data discovery solution, and so forth. We have built we have released all of these things: vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, as remote, lightweight technologies that our customers can deploy to make their process easier. So, augmenting physical, being able to do the assessment remotely, and then streamlining through automation continues to be the two main areas we are seeing on how people are adjusting to the COVID pandemic situation. Obviously, there are process-related items too, where both us as assessors and our customers have to be organized in remote meetings versus your traditional conference room meetings. But thank you for that question. We have a couple of more minutes, so I will take one more question, and then we will answer all the other remaining questions in an email. The question is, in case of continuous compliance, what are these 20 to 25 high impact and high risk questions? And would you like to receive a copy of it? So yes, we will send the required people who need it a copy of what are the 20 to 25 high impact, high risk questions that we evaluate every quarter as as part of continuous compliance. Typically, the 20 to 25 high risk questions are around important operational elements, things like vulnerability scanning, firewall rule set review, data discovery, making sure we reevaluate the scope every quarter, making sure we are doing the appropriate level of monitoring and the logs are still reporting, and really automating that process in addition to obviously the QSA doing a manual test as well is what continuous compliance is about. Just for everyone's benefit, ControlCase has taken the world of standards and converted them into a library of English-like questions with templates that we use as a framework for our assessments. And so 20 to 25 of them, certainly for PCI DSS, are questions that we customize for the customer. There's 10% here and there that changes, but generally those 20 to 25 remain the same. We work with you on a quarterly basis, and we are happy to share those questions if you just reach out to us either through our website or certainly for the folks who have asked that in this webinar, we will email you these questions as well. And if for anyone else, I know we haven't had a chance to go through all the questions right now, but please feel free to reach out to us at contact@controlcase.com. Go to our website, or reach out to us by phone for any other questions that you may have. Thank you so much for your time. We are again in half an hour, so I really appreciate everyone's time. You will receive email responses to the remainder of the questions here shortly. And everybody, have a great rest of the afternoon, and have a great weekend if you don't hear from us again. Thank you.